The night air in Jacksonville carried a quiet heat as Naomi stood on the porch of Brad's parents' home, holding little Peter against her shoulder. Her laptop bag hung from her other arm, the same bag she carried through late nights of coding, planning, and providing. Her posture was steady, but inside, she could feel something breaking. Brad stood right beside her, close enough that she could hear the tension in his breathing. His hand hovered near her back, wanting to comfort her, but he was too stunned to move. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to go. They had come for a calm discussion, a simple conversation about schedules. Instead, it turned into something far heavier. Brad's father stepped forward, his expression firm but uneasy. The porch light flickered overhead, as if the house itself was unsure how to react. "Naomi," he began, voice stiff, "maybe it's best you leave our home for now. You're distracting Brad from being the husband we raised him to be." The words didn't just land, they cut. Peter whimpered, sensing his mother's sudden stillness. Naomi kissed his forehead gently, not letting her face crumble. She refused to break down in front of the people who had never truly tried to understand her. Across the cul-de-sac, neighbors peeked through blinds and half-opened doors. Jacksonville had always been lively, but tonight the street felt colder than usual. Brad's voice cracked as he stepped forward. "Dad, are you serious right now? She carries this entire family." His parents exchanged confused glances. To them, Brad was simply being emotional. To Naomi, the statement held a truth they couldn't even begin to guess. Her hand tightened around the laptop strap, the same laptop she used to pay bills, they thought. Brad handled, the same device she used to run the company they didn't know existed. But she kept her silence. Brad's father crossed his arms, misreading everything. Brad's mother stood behind him, with a worried frown that did nothing to soften the blow. What they didn't know, what they had never bothered to consider, was that Naomi wasn't the burden they imagined. She was the one holding every loose board in this family together. A single moment stretched between all of them, heavy and painful. Have you ever reached a point where you gave your very best to people, supported them when they struggled, stood by them, even when you were tired, only for those same people to treat you like you didn't matter? Have you ever poured into a family that wasn't even your own, not for praise, but because you believed in love, only to be treated like you were the problem? Have you ever stayed quiet about your blessings, not because you were hiding, but because peace meant more to you than showing off what you had? Have you ever been misunderstood by someone you were actually helping, quietly, without recognition, without complaint, simply because you cared? Some of you watching know exactly how Naomi feels. Some of you have been the peacemaker. Some of you have held your tongue to avoid arguments. Some of you have carried responsibilities others never gave you credit for. Tonight's story speaks directly to anyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or misjudged. Especially inside a family dynamic where culture's expectations and beliefs collide. Naomi didn't just deal with in-law stress. She carried the weight of being a black woman navigating a space where she was always expected to shrink, even though she was the one lifting everyone around her. This story is for anyone who has ever felt unseen while doing the work that truly holds a home together. In-laws can bring unity, or they can become the weight that tests every bit of patience you have. In Naomi's case, they didn't simply misunderstand her. They tried to break her spirit without ever realizing how much she carried. They judged her work schedule without knowing she built a future for their son. They questioned her dedication without noticing she handled responsibilities far beyond what anyone saw. They whispered concerns about her priorities while benefiting from her effort every single day. They never once imagined that the same woman they criticized had been paying their mortgage, their car note, their overdue tuition bills, all while raising a child and running a business in silence. While they sat comfortably, Naomi was the one covering gaps, keeping everything steady, making sure their son had the life they believed she was taking away from him. And the moment they pushed her out, the moment they accused her of giving too little, was the same moment they lost the person holding their entire foundation together. So, what happens when the truth finally comes to light? When the woman they pushed away, the woman they dismissed, turns out to be the one holding their world together? What happens when the person they undervalued stands in front of them with proof of everything she carried in silence? Stay with me, because the moment Naomi reveals her truth will leave this family speechless, and the lesson they learn might just change the way you look at loyalty, love, and respect inside a home. Tonight's story isn't just drama. It's a reminder to never underestimate the quiet strength of the person you overlook, because sometimes the one you judge is the one saving you without saying a word. Welcome back to Mr. Graham's Stories, where life's most meaningful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this across YouTube. And before we go deeper into Naomi's journey, do me one favor, hit that like button and drop a comment below. It helps us reach more people who need stories like this. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Naomi shifted Peter higher on her hip as she stepped onto the familiar porch of Brad's parents' house. The humidity in Jacksonville clung to her skin, mixing with the exhaustion from a long day spent juggling code, meetings, and a toddler who refused his afternoon nap. Her laptop bag pulled on her shoulder, as if reminding her of everything still waiting once Peter was asleep. Brad walked beside her, carrying the quiet tension of a man trying to hold two worlds together. He wanted this evening to go smoothly. Naomi wanted that too. But the moment she saw Betsy and Richard through the glass door, standing side by side with stiff expressions, she knew something heavier waited inside. When the door opened, Betsy forced a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Richard stepped back to let them in, his jaw tight. Naomi's instincts sharpened. She'd learned long ago when a conversation was truly a family meeting. They barely sat down before it began. "Naomi," Betsy said, folding her hands, "we're worried about how things are going. Brad looks tired lately. You've been working so much. We feel he's carrying too much at home." "Carrying?" Naomi repeated softly, adjusting Peter's blanket. Her tone remained steady, respectful. She wasn't here to fight. Richard leaned forward. "We've noticed that dinner isn't always prepared, and Brad handles bedtime often. It's beginning to feel unbalanced." Brad stepped in immediately. "Mom, Dad, I told you Naomi works long hours because she's committed to what she does. We share responsibilities." Naomi exhaled slowly. She had heard comments like this before, small digs hidden under the cover of concern. Betsy offered a tight smile. "We just think a wife shouldn't be so distracted by work that her family becomes secondary." Brad's eyes widened. "Mom, stop. She is the reason we even—" But Naomi laid a gentle hand on his arm, signaling she could speak for herself. "I love my work," Naomi said calmly. "I also love my family. I manage both the best I can." Richard shook his head. "We aren't convinced. Brad shouldn't have to divide his time this way." Naomi straightened her back. She had respected this home from the moment she married Brad, but tonight their tone pressed deeper than usual. It wasn't concern, it was accusation. "So, let me understand," Naomi said softly. "You're upset because Brad supports me the same way I support him." "That's not what we're saying," Betsy quickly replied, but it was exactly what they were saying. The conversation sharpened, each comment more pointed. "You spend too much time on your laptop," Betsy continued. "Brad needs a partner who is present." Naomi blinked, stunned that they didn't realize the irony. The same laptop they resented was the tool she used to pay half the bills they assumed Brad covered alone. Brad's frustration surfaced. "Why are you blaming her? You're making it sound like Naomi doesn't contribute anything." Richard's tone hardened. "We're saying she takes too much of your time. A husband shouldn't be stretched this thin." The accusation wasn't just unfair, it was insulting. Naomi held her expression steady. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crack. Brad stood, unable to stay seated. His voice shook. "Do you even hear yourselves? Naomi has supported this family in more ways than you know." Richard raised a hand. "I think it's best if we put some space between all of us. Naomi, maybe it's best you leave for now." Naomi froze. Her grip tightened around Peter, whose lip trembled as he sensed the tension. Brad turned toward his father in disbelief. "Dad, what are you doing? You're kicking her out? This is unbelievable." Naomi rose to her feet, refusing to let them see pain on her face. She kissed Peter's forehead and made her way toward the porch with quiet dignity. Brad followed close behind, torn between anger and heartbreak. The porch light flickered again as they stepped outside, the night, swallowing the last bit of warmth from the living room behind them. Neighbors glanced through blinds, sensing trouble but pretending not to see. Brad's voice cracked as he called back through the doorway. "You're wrong about her. She does more than any of you realize." But they didn't respond. Naomi inhaled deeply, grounding herself before walking toward the car. She had been judged before, but rarely by people who owed her so much without knowing it. The hurt ran deep, but she kept moving. She had Peter to protect. She had her dignity to guard. She had her future to preserve. They reached the car and Brad opened the door for her. "Naomi, I'm so sorry," he whispered. Her voice trembled only slightly. "Let's just go." As Brad buckled Peter in, his phone buzzed with call after call from inside the house. He ignored each one. Right before he stepped into the driver's seat, Naomi looked at him, searching for reassurance. He gave it, not in words, but in the way he shut off his phone and placed it face down. Tonight, his loyalty was clear. Before we continue, make sure you hit that like button and drop a comment below. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Now, let's keep going. Naomi didn't look back at the doorway as she stepped off the porch. She knew if she did, the hurt in her chest might spill into something she wasn't ready to show. The night air wrapped around her as she held Peter close, whispering softly to calm him, though her own heart was beating unevenly. Brad followed a step behind, quiet but watchful, his anger simmering just beneath his skin. He kept glancing at her, wanting to speak, wanting to comfort her, but the words felt too small compared to the wound his parents had just opened. The gravel driveway crunched beneath their footsteps. The street lights cast a warm glow on the pavement, illuminating Naomi's face, a mixture of pain, resolve, and exhaustion. Peter's small fingers clung to her dress, his cheek wet with tears. Naomi kissed the top of his head. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, though her voice wavered. "Mommy's here." Brad swallowed hard. "Naomi, they were wrong. You know that, right?" She didn't answer immediately. Her jaw tightened, not out of anger but out of the strength required to hold herself together. She had faced judgment before, from colleagues, strangers, people who didn't understand her drive or her world. But facing it from Brad's parents? That felt different. It felt personal in a way she hadn't prepared for. When they reached the car, Brad gently took Peter so Naomi could settle herself. As he buckled their son into the back seat, Peter's cries softened into quiet whimpers. His eyes, round and confused, watched both of them as if trying to make sense of the tension he'd witnessed. Naomi walked around to the passenger's side, taking a slow breath to steady herself. She slid into the seat, her body sinking into the familiar cushion as, though the car itself was the only solid ground she had left tonight. Brad sat behind the wheel and turned on the engine, though he didn't drive yet. The hum of the motor filled the silence. "Talk to me," he said finally, voice low and sincere. "Please." Naomi looked straight ahead at the quiet Jacksonville street. Lawns were trimmed neat, houses aligned like models of stability, the kind that often hid fractures beneath the surface. "What do you want me to say?" she murmured. "That I'm hurt, that I'm tired, that I don't know how many more times I can stay quiet to keep the peace." Brad reached for her hand. She let him hold it. "They acted like you don't do anything," he said. "But I see everything, every late night, every sacrifice, the way you care for Peter, the way you care for us." Tears stung her eyes, but didn't fall. Naomi had always been careful with her emotions. She learned early in life that a calm voice was often more powerful than raised tones. "They don't understand me," she said finally. "They don't try to." Brad nodded slowly, regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry you had to hear that from my father." He crossed a line. Naomi's gaze lowered to her hands. "He didn't just cross a line, Brad. He erased everything he thought I brought to this family, as if my only value is how well I cook dinner or fold laundry." She shook her head softly. "I can't shrink myself to fit the role they want." Brad squeezed her hand. "I don't want you to. I love who you are." Outside the car, a few neighbors lingered on their porches, pretending to tidy something or adjust a chair, casual enough to hide their curiosity. But Naomi knew they'd heard enough to form their own opinions. She wasn't embarrassed. She was disappointed. Brad put the car in reverse and backed out slowly. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, a shadowed outline of a place that never truly welcomed her. As they drove, the streets of Jacksonville glowed with dim light. Palms swayed slightly in the breeze. Cars were parked outside homes where families enjoyed peaceful nights without accusations or harsh words. Inside the car, silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of all the things they weren't saying yet. Brad tapped the steering wheel, uncertain. "I hate that they made you feel unwanted." Naomi turned her face toward the window. "It's not the first time, Brad." He startled. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "Your mother never accepted how much I worked. Your father has always seen my ambition as a threat to what he thinks a wife should be." Brad exhaled deeply. "I should have spoken up sooner." "You can't fight every battle for me," she said softly. But tonight hurt more than usual. Brad's voice cracked. I'm standing with you now, completely. That promise, simple as it was, eased a small part of her pain. They turned onto a quieter road leading toward her apartment. The city lights glittered through the windshield, casting shifting highlights across Naomi's face. Peter made a small sound behind them, reminding Naomi of the little life caught in the middle of this chaos. She turned slightly to look at him, brushing her fingers across his tiny hand. I don't want him growing up around people who see me as less than what I am, she whispered. He won't, Brad said firmly. I won't let that happen. As they neared the apartment complex, Brad's phone began buzzing uncontrollably, call after call from his parents. He looked at the screen, jaw tightening. Naomi could see the battle in his eyes, the conflict between loyalty to his parents and the truth he knew tonight revealed. The phone buzzed again. Brad took a breath, then pressed the power button until the screen went black. Silence filled the car. That simple act, choosing her over everything else, hit Naomi deeper than any apology. Brad, she whispered. I'm here, he said, eyes glistening. I'm with you, no matter what. As they parked and stepped out, Naomi felt the weight of the night settling on her like a heavy quilt. Yet beneath it she also felt something else, a quiet strength, the kind that comes when love stands firm beside you. They walked toward the apartment door, their steps slow but united, unaware that Brad's parents still had no idea just how much Naomi had been carrying, and how much their lives were about to change. The apartment felt smaller than Naomi remembered. She hadn't lived here since before she and Brad were married, back when she was still building her tech company from scratch and pulling all-nighters with takeout containers scattered across the counter. Tonight, the space greeted her with a silence that felt heavier than the Florida night air. Brad set Peter down gently on the couch, giving their son a moment to breathe. Peter rubbed his eyes, confusion still written across his tiny face as he looked around a home he barely recognized. Naomi dropped her keys on the small entry table and exhaled long and slow. The weight of the evening, the confrontation, the unspoken pain, it all settled in her chest. She reached for a few baby wipes to clean Peter's cheeks. It's okay, sweet boy, she whispered, lifting his chin. We're just staying somewhere new for a little while. Brad stood nearby, guilt thick in his expression. Naomi, if I had known tonight would go like that, I never would have taken you there. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she carried Peter to the bedroom and laid him on the soft blankets she kept folded for emergencies. The gentle rhythm of her voice and touch eventually lulled him to sleep. When she stepped back into the living room, Brad was waiting, shoulders slumped, eyes full of regret. Naomi walked past him and began tidying toys from her old storage bin. I'm not angry at you, she said calmly. I'm just tired. Brad moved closer. You have every right to be upset. They treated you like... Don't finish that sentence. She lifted a hand. I don't want to spend tonight repeating their words. He nodded slowly, respecting her boundary. Naomi sank onto the couch, leaning her head back. She wasn't someone who cried easily. Her grandmother always said strength was not about pushing through everything alone, but about knowing when to rest. Right now, rest was the only thing she craved, even though she knew sleep wouldn't come easily. Brad sat beside her, leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel crowded. Tell me what you need from me tonight. She looked at him, surprised by the softness of his tone. I need honesty, she said. I need to know you aren't just saying things to make me feel better. You want honesty? Brad shifted closer. I should have stood up to them months ago. I should have stopped the comments, the hints, the pressure. I should have told them how hard you work, how much you do, how much you give. Naomi's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him. She did, but it still hurt that it took something this painful to bring the truth out. She lowered her eyes. You didn't deserve to be caught in the middle. I wasn't caught in the middle, he insisted. I was caught in silence. That's on me. The room dimmed as the lamp flickered softly. Naomi tucked her knees to her chest, letting her guard slip just a little. I've always tried to blend into your family, to be respectful, to be understanding, to not make anything harder. You never made anything harder, Brad said. They just never tried to understand you the way they should. She rubbed the back of her neck. Your father acted like I take more than I give. If only he knew. Her voice trailed off. She couldn't bring herself to finish the thought. Not tonight. Brad leaned forward. Naomi, I know how much you do. I've seen you at 2 in the morning typing on your laptop while rocking Peter with your foot. I've seen you leave. Important meetings to help my mom with her errands. I've watched you pay bills before I even had a chance to ask what they were. You hold everything together." Naomi didn't reply. She wasn't ready to reveal just how much she truly carried. Not yet. She stood, grabbed her laptop, and sat at the small kitchen table. Opening it felt familiar, grounding. Lines of code and spreadsheets greeted her like old friends. She slipped into work mode, partly because she needed to, partly because the quiet discipline steadied her heart. Brad watched from the couch. "You're working? I need to clear my mind," she said. "This helps." He nodded, understanding her in a way he always had, even if he hadn't always defended her the way he should. Peter let out a soft whine from the bedroom, and Naomi pushed her chair back to check on him, but Brad stopped her gently. "I'll go," he said. "You've done enough today." She hesitated, then allowed herself the small gift of release. She watched Brad walk to the bedroom, sway Peter back into deeper sleep, and return quietly. When he sat beside her again, he reached for her hand. "You didn't deserve what happened," he whispered. "I'm sorry." Naomi looked at him, her heart softening for the first time since they left the house. "I know." He leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, a gesture full of apology, loyalty, and love. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was the kind of moment that reminded her why she chose him in the first place. She closed the laptop halfway and rested her hand on his cheek. "We're starting fresh," she murmured. "Just us. For now." He nodded. "For as long as you need." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't tense. It was gentle. Healing. But miles away, Brad's parents sat in their living room, trying to make sense of a night they believed Naomi had caused, unaware that the woman they pushed out was the very person who kept their comfortable life from collapsing. They had no idea how close they were to learning a truth that would shake them to their core, and Naomi had no idea that their assumptions about her were about to grow even more misguided. The new chapter of their lives had begun, quietly, painfully, and with more consequences than anyone realized. The quiet of the apartment carried a steady rhythm by morning, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak from the hallway, and the light breaths of Peter sleeping in the next room. Naomi sat at the small kitchen table with her laptop open, the glow reflecting against her focused eyes. She hadn't slept much, but she was used to pushing through exhaustion. Discipline had built everything she now had. Lines of code scrolled across her screen, part of a new update for her education tech platform. Her fingers moved quickly, instinctively. Coding was where she found control, clarity, and the confidence she didn't always feel outside the digital world. Her phone chimed softly. A notification flashed across the screen, deposit received, monthly dividends from long-term holdings. She nodded to herself. Years earlier, she'd studied the market the same way she studied software, by dissecting it, learning patterns, practicing discipline. She never gambled money. She invested slowly, carefully, thoughtfully. Every decision had been rooted in protecting her family and lifting people around her. She clicked into her financial dashboard. Several accounts filled the screen: business revenue, investment returns, charitable fund allocations, and automatic transfers she had set up long before Brad's parents ever knew she existed. Of course, they still didn't know these accounts existed, not a single one. A soft smile tugged at her lips as she opened her spreadsheet titled Community Support, 2024. Rows of donations, funding for her mother's neighborhood mentoring program, after-school computer lab fees, grocery support for her Aunt Ebony when she started her catering business, repairs for the community center she grew up visiting. Naomi's world wasn't flashy. It was generous, intentional, rooted in the culture that raised her. Her mind drifted back to those warm Sundays on Jacksonville's north side, the smell of grilled chicken, kids running. Across the yard, her uncles debating loudly about football, and gospel music drifting from open windows. She remembered how everyone pitched in, whether or not they had much to give. Community wasn't a buzzword, it was a lifestyle. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby, abundance means nothing if you don't use it to lift someone else." Naomi embodied that. A laugh broke through her thoughts, a memory of the last barbecue she attended. Aunt Ebony, loud and dramatic as always, had nudged her during dinner and said, "Girl, with the kind of money you're making, you sure you don't have a yacht somewhere? Don't play with me, Naomi." Naomi nearly choked on her lemonade from laughing. "Ebony, please. I don't even like boats." But Ebony didn't let up. "If I find out you're hiding a yacht, I'm telling everybody you made me eat potato salad for free when you should have been sponsoring the whole cookout." The entire yard erupted. Even Naomi's little cousins ran around shouting, "Naomi got a yacht! Naomi got a yacht!" She smiled now, shaking her head. Her family teased her out of love, the kind that never asked for anything but made room for her to shine. Her laptop chimed again. This time it was a reminder, upcoming bills to cover, Brad's parents' accounts. Naomi's smile faded slightly as she clicked into the linked statements. She had been covering their mortgage for 7 months. The car payment for 5, Betsy's class fees, Richard's property tax installments, all handled without hesitation, because she loved Brad, and she believed. Supporting his family was part of building a future together. But now, she stared at the overdue dates. Her chest tightened. It wasn't the money that bothered her. She had more than enough to keep them afloat. It was the disrespect, the assumptions, the way they treated her like someone who required guidance instead of someone who had been carrying their weight in silence. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "You threw me out, and I'm still paying your mortgage," she whispered to herself. The irony made her laugh, a tired, humorless laugh, because the whole situation would almost be funny if it wasn't so painful. Brad walked into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He wore the same shirt from last night and looked emotionally wrung out. "You're already working?" he asked gently. "It helps me think," she said, closing a document. He sat across from her, concern etched in the lines on his face. "Are you okay?" She paused. "I'm managing." He didn't push. Naomi appreciated that about him. He knew when she needed space and when she needed closeness. Her screen lit up again, showing a detailed summary of his parents' monthly expenses. Brad leaned forward. "Is that—" Naomi turned the laptop slightly toward herself. "Just checking something." He hesitated. "Naomi, you don't have to keep helping them." She swallowed. "I know, but the decision wasn't simple. Cutting them off would be fair, maybe even necessary, but it would also drop them into financial chaos they weren't prepared for. Do you want to stop?" Brad asked quietly. She didn't answer. Not yet. Her finger hovered over the payment automation button. Disable transfers? Yes or no? Her heart tugged in both directions. After everything they said, after the disrespect, after pushing her out, did they deserve her support? She closed the window without choosing. Brad watched her carefully. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." Naomi nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the financial dashboard, her mind weighing compassion against self-preservation. It was the first moment she allowed herself to admit they had no idea how much she had done for them, and they had no idea how close they were to losing all of it. Naomi stared at the payment schedule, realizing their next bills were coming, due, and for the first time she debated letting them face the consequences. Morning sunlight poured through the blinds of Betsy and Richard's living room, but the brightness didn't match the atmosphere in their home. The previous night's argument lingered like a cloud neither of them wanted to acknowledge out loud. Richard sat stiffly in his recliner, arms crossed, staring at a stack of papers he had gathered from the hallway table. Betsy hovered near him, wiping the same spot on the counter over and over again. "Did you call Brad?" she asked for the 3rd time that morning. He didn't answer, Richard muttered. Phone went straight to voicemail. Betsy bit her lip. "Do you think he's still upset?" Richard didn't respond. He had opened a letter from the mortgage company and was frowning hard enough to create a deep line across his forehead. "Something wrong?" Betsy asked, inching closer. Richard grunted. "Why is our mortgage late?" Betsy blinked. "Late? No, that can't be right. I thought—" Richard cut her off. "I thought you handled the automatic payments." "I did. I thought I did." She rushed to the desk and opened their laptop. Her fingers tapped through banking screens with increasing urgency. "Richard, our last 2 payments didn't process." He stood up abruptly. "That can't be right. We've always had money for the mortgage." Images flashed through his mind. Birthday checks, little outings, the quiet confidence he took in knowing he managed his household well. But now, his screen displayed red alerts and overdue notices he didn't remember authorizing. Betsy clicked around frantically. "Maybe the banking system is having issues. I should call someone." Before Richard could stop her, she had dialed the mortgage company and put the phone on speaker. A representative answered cheerfully. "Thank you for calling. How can I assist?" "Yes," Betsy said, voice trembling. "Your system seems wrong." Our payments aren't showing. The representative checked their account. Ma'am, your payments didn't go through because there were insufficient funds in the linked account. Betsy's jaw dropped. Richard's eyes widened. Insufficient? Betsy repeated. No, that's impossible. The representative responded gently. I'm afraid the last successful payment was 4 months ago. When the call ended, Betsy sank into the kitchen chair as though someone had pulled all her strength from beneath her. Richard planted both hands on the counter and stared at the wall. How could this happen? Betsy whispered. Richard didn't have an answer, and nothing bothered him more than an unanswered question. He grabbed their credit card bill next, another overdue notice. This isn't possible, he snapped. We've never missed payments like this. Betsy rubbed her temples. Maybe Brad was supposed to help with something? Maybe he forgot? Naomi has him so preoccupied. Richard stiffened. I knew it. I knew she was distracting him from his responsibilities. Betsy nodded quickly, eager for any explanation that didn't make them feel irresponsible. That must be it. Brad's been so focused on her work schedule that he neglected to keep track of things here. They comforted themselves with that theory, not realizing how far from the truth it was. Meanwhile, across the city, Naomi sat quietly with Brad and Peter, completely unaware that Betsy and Richard were now blaming Brad for the financial confusion she had silently shielded them from for months. Back at the house, Richard turned to Betsy. Call the electric company. See if they're having the same issue. Betsy dialed, pacing across the living room. Hello? Yes, our power bill hasn't been updated on our app. No, I'm not late. What do you mean I am? She stopped walking as the representative explained. Richard watched her face pale as the facts dropped one after another. But I always pay on time, Betsy insisted softly. I always do. Then came the phrase she dreaded. Ma'am, this is the 3rd month in a row. The call ended. Betsy sat down and whispered, This doesn't make sense. Richard rubbed his forehead. We need to talk to Brad. He needs to help sort this out. But the phone went straight to voicemail again. He's ignoring us, Richard said bitterly. Betsy crossed her arms. This is what happens when a son marries a woman who doesn't understand family priorities. Richard nodded in firm agreement. Naomi keeps him wrapped up in her world. He's forgotten his role. Neither of them stopped to consider the truth. Naomi had been paying these bills long before they ever became overdue. Brad wasn't the reason for their financial decline, and the very person they blamed was the same person they had pushed out without hesitation. The irony simmered beneath the surface of their living room, ready to erupt when the truth eventually reached them. Richard picked up the phone again. I'll call the bank. Betsy clutched his arm. Wait, maybe we shouldn't get Brad involved just yet. We don't want him thinking we're struggling. Richard nodded slowly. Pride was a hard habit to break. We'll fix this ourselves. We always do. But fixing involved more confusion than progress. Richard spent the next hour clicking through their online accounts, checking statements, muttering to himself. Betsy sat beside him, suggesting passwords he might have forgotten. The process was messy, frantic, and increasingly desperate. Finally, Richard leaned back. None of this adds up. Our balances are lower than they should be. Betsy clasped her hands tightly. What if we really can't cover everything next month? The room fell silent. For the first time, neither had an answer. Meanwhile, miles away, Brad sat on the couch next to Naomi and said, We don't have to rush anything today. She nodded, grateful for the break. But her thoughts still lingered on the payment she had postponed. She knew that soon, Betsy and Richard's world would collide with the truth they never imagined. At their house, Richard stood tall again, clinging to pride. We'll figure it out. Maybe Brad just forgot a transfer. He'll fix it. Betsy nodded, clinging to a belief she didn't fully trust. They still had no idea. The safety net they relied on was gone, and it had never come from Brad in the first place. Before we continue, go ahead and hit that like button if you're following Naomi's journey closely. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to the channel. Now, let's see what happens when both sides feel the pressure. The next few days settled into a rhythm Naomi didn't enjoy but accepted. Her apartment became the headquarters of her new reality, part daycare, part temporary refuge, part workspace. In the mornings, she brewed coffee while Peter babbled in his high chair, dropping cereal pieces like he was feeding invisible birds. Brad rushed between the bedroom and the kitchen, trying to prepare for his school day while also entertaining their son. Peter, buddy, Brad said, lifting him into his arms. Why are you up 2 hours earlier than usual? Peter giggled and tugged at Brad's beard. Naomi watched them with a soft smile, though her eyes carried a trace of exhaustion. She slid her laptop open again, reviewing updates for her platform. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, but her mind drifted in and out of the work. Balancing motherhood, a marriage under strain, and a company that never slept was challenging enough. Doing it all after being pushed out of a home where she'd never truly been welcomed added a weight no entrepreneur training ever mentioned. Still, Naomi refused to slow down. Even now, with uncertainty around Brad's parents' bills, she worked. That was who she was, resilient, steady, unwilling to let hardship dictate her pace. Brad glanced at her as he put Peter down for a moment. "You've barely rested." "I'll rest tonight," she lied, her eyes still on the screen. He didn't argue. He knew Naomi's version of rest often meant a short nap between coding sessions. As Brad gathered his things for work, Peter toddled toward Naomi with his arms stretched high. She pulled him into her lap, resting her cheek on his hair. The innocence of his presence softened the room. "You're the reason I keep going," she whispered. Brad kissed the top of her head. "I'll call during lunch," he said. "We'll figure everything out together." When the door closed behind him, Naomi sat still for a moment. Her laptop screen reflected the list of paused bills for Brad's parents. She exhaled deeply. She wasn't angry, but she was struggling, not with the money, but with how much she had given without acknowledgement, without loyalty in return. Across the city, the atmosphere inside Betsy and Richard's home had grown tense. Their once neat living room now held stacks of unopened mail. The couple sat side by side on the couch, dramatically different from their composed personas earlier in the week. Richard rubbed his temples. "I can't believe we missed this many payments." Betsy clutched a stack of envelopes. "What if someone stole our information? What if there's a glitch? You already called them yesterday." "It wasn't a glitch," Richard replied sharply. Betsy let out a shaky breath. "Well then, how did we get here? We've never been late." Richard remained quiet. Every time he looked at their account balances, a wave of embarrassment rolled through him. As much as he disliked admitting it, he had quietly relied on the transfers. That came like clockwork, transfers he assumed came from Brad. But those transfers had stopped, and he had no idea why. Betsy rose abruptly. "I'm calling the water company next." She dialed, pacing the length of the kitchen. "Yes, I'm calling about our bill. It says past due, but we paid." Her voice trailed into confusion. "No, I didn't realize the last payment didn't go through." Richard listened, tense and silent. When Betsy hung up, she said, "That's another one." "So everything is behind," Richard muttered. "It's like someone turned off the faucet," she replied nervously. "Everything just stopped." Richard straightened. "We need to talk to Brad. We can't keep guessing." He called again. Voicemail. Again, voicemail. "He's ignoring us," Richard said, his pride bruised. "He's choosing her over his family. Maybe if we hadn't been so harsh." Betsy whispered, but the thought was quickly buried. Admitting they were wrong meant facing a fairness they didn't want to acknowledge yet. Back in Naomi's apartment, lunchtime arrived. Brad called as promised, sounding both exhausted and amused. "Peter used my shoe as a bowl for his snacks," Naomi reported dryly. "You left me alone with a toddler and chaos won." Brad laughed, a genuine laugh that eased some of the day's weight. "I'll bring dinner tonight. Something easy. You say that like you're not going to come home with pizza again." "Hey, I'm consistent," Brad said. "That's worth something." Naomi smiled. "I'll take it." After the call, she settled Peter with toys and returned to her laptop. Her mind wandered again to Brad's parents. She clicked through her accounts and saw the overdue dates blinking in red. Each blinking notification felt like a silent question. How long will you keep carrying people who don't carry you? The question lingered. As afternoon turned to evening, a knock sounded at Betsy and Richard's door. They jumped. Richard opened it to find a neighbor returning a package. The neighbor stepped away quickly, but Richard noticed something, even the simplest. Interactions reminded him how fragile his composed life was feeling. That evening, he turned to Betsy. "We need answers. I don't care what Brad's dealing with. He needs to tell us what's happening." Betsy nodded slowly, but something uneasy flickered in her expression. For the first time, she wondered if Brad's silence had nothing to do with negligence, and everything to do with Naomi. She picked up her phone. "Should we call her?" Betsy asked. Richard stiffened. "Call Naomi? After what happened?" Well, Betsy whispered, if she influenced Brad, maybe she knows why everything is stopped. Richard didn't like the idea, but desperation had a way of overpowering ego. Fine, he said. Call her. Betsy hesitated, then pressed Naomi's name on her phone. The line rang. Across town, Naomi looked at her screen. Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. Brad's parents never called her, especially not after the porch confrontation. She stared at the ringing phone, unsure whether to answer. But she did. Hello? She said carefully. Naomi. Hi, Betsy said, attempting warmth. We need to talk. It's important. Naomi glanced at her laptop, at the paused payments, at the bills she had quietly covered for months. For the first time, power shifted to her side of the conversation. Betsy had no idea she was calling the very person holding the key to their unraveling finances, and the truth was about to draw closer. Naomi sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of warm tea steaming beside her laptop. Peter was down for his afternoon nap, sprawled across his blanket with his hands balled into soft, sleepy fists. The apartment was peaceful, one of the rare moments where Naomi could breathe without distraction. She clicked through invoices and project updates for her platform. The code she wrote last night still needed minor adjustments. She was halfway through fixing a bug when her phone vibrated loudly across the table. The name on the screen made her eyebrows lift. Betsy. Naomi stared at the name for a moment. She considered letting it ring, letting the silence stand in place of every emotion she had swallowed over the past few days. But she wasn't built that way. She believed in facing things head-on, with strength, grace, and clarity. She answered, Hello? Naomi said evenly. There was a shaky pause before Betsy spoke. Naomi. Hi. We need to talk. Naomi sat back in her chair, not surprised but mildly amused at the sudden shift in tone. She had expected this call eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not this soon, but she knew the moment of discovery would come. Okay, Naomi replied calmly. What's going on? Betsy cleared her throat, her voice wobbling. Things are falling apart. Bills aren't getting paid. Payments stopped. We don't understand what happened. Naomi's lips pressed into a thin line. I see. Richard's voice suddenly appeared in the background, louder than intended. Ask her if Brad changed accounts. Ask her what he did. Naomi blinked, but kept her voice steady. Is Richard there too? Yes, Betsy admitted, sounding embarrassed. We're both here. We just need answers. Naomi almost smiled. The irony was too rich to ignore. They were calling the very person they had pushed out without hesitation. The same person who had funded nearly every major expense in their household for months. The same person they had accused of being the problem. But Naomi refused to respond with anger. That wasn't her character, and it wasn't who she wanted her son to see one day. Betsy, Naomi said gently, have you talked to Brad about this? We tried, Betsy said quickly. He isn't answering. He's not answering because he needs space, Naomi explained. We all do. Richard's voice rose again. Naomi, with all due respect, we don't need a lesson about space. We need to know what's going on with our finances. Naomi took a quiet breath to steady herself. I understand you're stressed, but raising your voice won't make this conversation easier. There was a short silence, then Betsy whispered, I'm sorry. We've never been in this situation before. Naomi nodded even though they couldn't see her. I understand. Brad walked into the apartment at that exact moment, lunch bag in hand, his expression softening when he saw her. Naomi put the call on speaker. Hello? Brad said cautiously, placing the bag on the counter. Betsy scrambled. Brad, thank goodness. We've been trying to reach you. Brad exhaled slowly. I know. You need to come over, Richard insisted. Something's wrong with our accounts. Our payments stopped. Our balances are low. We need you to look into it. Brad sat beside Naomi and looked at her before speaking. Dad, I haven't touched anything. Then why are things a mess? Richard demanded. Everything was fine until... Naomi raised a hand toward the phone, silently asking Brad to let her speak. Betsy, Naomi said, calm but firm. Richard, listen carefully. I think it would help all of us to sit down together and talk in person. There was a pause on the other end. You'll meet with us? Betsy asked softly. Yes, Naomi replied, but only if we can have a respectful conversation. No raised voices, no accusations, just clarity. Betsy quickly agreed. Yes, of course. Whatever you need. Richard hesitated. We just want answers. You'll get them, Naomi said. I promise. Brad looked at her, surprised but proud. Are you sure you want to do that? Naomi nodded. It's time. And where should we meet? Betsy asked. Naomi thought for a moment. A neutral place. Somewhere calm. Somewhere that wouldn't trigger the emotions tied to either household. I'll choose a location and text you, she replied. Okay, Betsy said quietly. We'll be there. When Naomi ended the call, Brad turned to her. You don't owe them this. Maybe not, Naomi said, closing her laptop. But I owe myself peace, and the only way to get it is to clear the air. Brad rested his forehead against hers. Whatever you decide, I'm standing with you. Naomi nodded, but her mind drifted to something deeper. She wasn't going to the meeting for revenge. She wasn't going to gloat or shame them or make them feel small. She was going to show them the truth, plainly, respectfully, fully, because truth was the one thing they never gave her a chance to share. As she stood, she walked to her file cabinet. Small, plain, nothing fancy. Inside were binders and folders she kept organized for tax season, audits, and personal record-keeping. She pulled out a black folder, one she had never shown Brad's parents. Inside were the documents, the transfers, the statements, the invoices she had covered since the beginning of the year. She placed it on the table. Brad watched her carefully. You're really going to show them? I am, she said. It's time for them to understand the real situation. She slid the folder into her tote bag and zipped it shut. As Naomi prepared for the meeting, she wasn't preparing for battle. She was preparing for truth. And truth was far more powerful than anything they expected. Naomi chose a quiet cafe on the south side of Jacksonville, tucked between a family-owned bookstore and a small flower shop that always smelled faintly of jasmine. The cafe wasn't fancy, just clean, peaceful, and private enough for a conversation that needed space to breathe. Morning sunlight filtered through the wide windows, warming the room with a soft glow. She arrived 10 minutes early, dressed simply in dark jeans and a cream blouse, her tote bag resting at her side. Inside it sat the black folder, every receipt, transfer, deposit, withdrawal, and automatic payment she had covered for Brad's parents. She took a slow breath, grounding herself. Today wasn't about anger. It was about clarity. Brad had offered to come, but Naomi asked him to wait nearby, just in case anything went wrong. She wanted to face this moment on her own first. He respected her choice entirely. As she waited, she stirred her tea absent-mindedly, her mind drifting back to the confrontation on the porch. The dismissive tone, the assumptions, the feeling of being pushed out. She had carried these emotions quietly, but they no longer hurt the way they did before. Something inside her had shifted. She had nothing left to prove, only truth left to share. The bell above the door jingled, and Betsy entered first. She looked more tired than usual. Her hair pulled back quickly, her blouse unevenly tucked. Richard followed behind her, shoulders stiff, expression guarded. They were earlier than Naomi expected. Their eyes scanned the cafe until they spotted her sitting near the window. Naomi, Betsy said softly, almost cautiously. Hi, Naomi replied, giving a polite nod. They approached the table slowly. Richard cleared his throat. Can we sit? Please, Naomi said. Betsy sat with her hands clasped tightly together. Richard sat straighter, trying to maintain a posture of control, even though the tension in his body betrayed him. Naomi folded her hands. Thank you both for coming. We didn't know where else to turn, Betsy admitted, her voice trembling with a mixture of shame and urgency. Our accounts are... Well, we're struggling to understand what happened. Richard's jaw ticked. Our payments stopped, our balances are low, and we didn't change anything. Naomi listened quietly, her expression unreadable. Then came the question she expected. Did Brad move money without telling us? Betsy asked. No, Naomi answered calmly. He didn't. Betsy blinked. Then why did everything fall apart all of a sudden? Richard leaned forward. Naomi, you've always been involved in Brad's business. Did something happen that we don't know about? Naomi held his gaze. Yes, several things happened, none of them the way you think. They both stiffened. Let me ask you something, Naomi continued, her tone neutral. Before everything stopped, did you ever wonder where the money was coming from? For the mortgage, the car, the tuition? Betsy exchanged a confused look with Richard. We assumed Brad handled it. He always supported his family. Naomi nodded slightly. You assumed? Richard frowned. What are you implying? Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her calmness alone shifted the ground beneath the conversation. I'm implying that assumptions can hide the truth, she said. Betsy's hands tightened. Naomi, if you know something, please tell us. We won't judge. We just need clarity. Naomi paused, letting the moment settle. I want you to understand what really happened, she said, choosing her words carefully. Not the version created by frustration or assumptions. The factual version. Richard leaned back, his face tightening. Then explain. Naomi reached for her tote bag and placed it gently beside her chair. She didn't pull anything out yet. Instead, she looked both of them in the eyes. I know you're overwhelmed, she said. I know you're scared and confused and trying to understand why your finances shifted so suddenly. But before I show you anything, you need to understand something else first. They both sat up straighter, sensing the seriousness of the moment. What's that? Betsy asked quietly. Naomi folded her hands. Everything I'm about to show you is not meant to embarrass you or hurt you. I'm showing you because it's time for truth, and because clarity is the only way for all of us to move forward. Betsy swallowed hard. Richard shifted in his seat, his bravado fading just slightly. Naomi decided to begin slowly. You asked what happened to your payments, she said. Why the mortgage didn't go through, why the car payment stopped, why tuition wasn't covered. Yes, Richard said. Exactly. Naomi took a breath. Those payments were being made by me. The cafe grew still. Even the mild chatter from other customers felt distant. Betsy blinked repeatedly, her mind struggling to process the statement. You, she asked, almost inaudible. Richard's eyebrows shot up. Why would you be paying our mortgage? Naomi remained steady. Because I wanted to support Brad. And support both of you. I believe that family works both ways. Giving, supporting, lifting one another up. Betsy's eyes began to water. Naomi, why didn't you ever tell us? Naomi lifted one shoulder slightly. You never asked, and honestly, you never seemed interested in knowing. That sentence broke something in the room. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. Betsy stared at her hands. Naomi continued gently. I helped because I care about Brad, because I care about this family, because it was important to me that you didn't feel pressured or burdened. Richard rubbed his forehead, bewildered. Then why did everything stop? Naomi finally reached down and took out the black folder. I think it's time you saw everything clearly, she said. She placed the folder lightly on the center of the table. This will explain what happened. Betsy stared at it as though it were something fragile. Richard stared at it as though it might undo everything he believed. Neither reached for it. Naomi's voice softened. Whenever you're ready. Betsy and Richard hesitated, staring at the folder. The truth sitting, inches away, waiting to shatter everything they thought they knew. For several long seconds, no one touched the folder. It sat in the center of the table like a quiet truth, waiting to be acknowledged. The cafe noise hummed faintly around them. The hiss of the espresso machine, quiet chatter. The scraping of a spoon against a ceramic cup. But at their table, time felt suspended. Betsy's hands trembled slightly. Richard's jaw was clenched tight. Naomi sat with calm composure, not pushing them, not rushing the moment. She knew this pause mattered. It was the space where pride met reality. Finally, Betsy exhaled and reached forward. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the folder before she pulled it slowly toward her. She opened it with careful hands, as though each page might break. The first sheet was a simple spreadsheet, clean, precise, color-coded. In the far left column were payment descriptions. In the center were dates. And on the right, Naomi's name. Betsy stared, reading line after line. Mortgage payment, car payment, tuition deposit, property fees, each listed, paid from Naomi's account. Her breath caught. This can't be right. Richard leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the evidence. He flipped to the next page, graphs showing payment history. The lines were clear. Every time his household expenses were covered, the source was the same. What is this? Richard demanded, although the truth was already staring him in the face. Naomi's voice was gentle but steady. It's the record of what I've taken care of over the last several months. You paid all this? Betsy whispered, looking up with watery eyes. Yes, Naomi said, quietly, consistently. Without asking for anything in return, Richard's face drained of color. He flipped through more pages, his hands moving faster now as pressure built in his chest. Tuition payments, he muttered. That was you, not Brad? Naomi nodded. The car note? He pressed. Yes. The taxes? Yes. Betsy covered her mouth. Richard leaned back in his chair as though the truth physically pushed him away. We didn't know, Betsy whispered. That's the point, Naomi replied softly. You didn't know because you never considered the possibility. You assumed Brad was doing everything. You assumed I wasn't contributing, and you spoke to me as though I wasn't holding anything together. Betsy's tears gathered again. Naomi, we thought Brad was stressed because of your job. We thought you were pulling him away from his duties. Naomi held her gaze. While you thought I was the one making things harder, I was the one making things easier. Richard swallowed harshly, searching for something, anything, to anchor himself. Why? He finally asked. Why would you do all this? Naomi answered simply, because I love your son, and because I believe supporting his family was part of building a future with him. Betsy pressed a hand to her chest, emotion swelling in her eyes. You helped us like this, and we treated you like, her voice cracked, like you were in the way. For the first time since she walked inside, Naomi let her own emotions surface. Not anger, disappointment. I didn't expect praise, she said. I didn't expect thanks. But I did expect respect, or at least fairness. Richard sat frozen. His past words from that night replayed loudly in his mind. Maybe it's best you leave our home for now. He had thrown out the person responsible for keeping his household afloat. Naomi continued, her voice calm but piercing. When you pushed me out, you weren't just removing me from your home. You were pushing away the person who was actively protecting your stability. Betsy looked at Richard, eyes wide. We misjudged her, she whispered. Horribly. Richard's lips parted, but no words came out. Naomi reached into the folder again and pulled out one final page. She placed it gently in front of them. It was a list of dates, the exact days each bill was paid. And then the final line. Payment stopped on the night Naomi was removed from their home. Betsy covered her mouth again. We caused it, she whispered. We caused all of this. Naomi nodded slowly. I didn't stop paying out of spite. I stopped because it was no longer my place to assume responsibility for a household that didn't want me. Richard lowered his head into his hands. For a man who took pride in control, this realization gutted him. His assumptions, his pride, his old values, all of it had created a collapse he blamed on everyone but himself. The room fell quiet again. Then Naomi spoke the line that shifted everything. I funded everything, she said softly. And you still threw me out. Betsy broke. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, Naomi, I'm so sorry. We were wrong. Richard forced himself to meet her eyes, his voice unsteady. We didn't see you clearly. We didn't see anything clearly. We judged you without understanding who you really are. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held their shame with quiet dignity. I don't want you to feel small, she said gently. I just want honesty and accountability. We can't heal anything if the truth stays buried. Betsy reached across the table instinctively, though she stopped halfway, unsure if Naomi wanted the gesture. Naomi didn't pull away. She allowed Betsy to hold her hand lightly, respectfully. Richard cleared his throat, emotion thick. Naomi, thank you for everything you did, and for showing us the truth today. Naomi nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without lingering on it. The weight of the moment settled deeply, heavy, humbling, and necessary. A turning point had arrived. If this truth hit you the way it hit this family, go ahead and tap that like button. Comment your thoughts below. It helps us share these powerful life lessons with more people. Now, let's see what happens as emotions shift and the road to forgiveness begins. The cafe had gone quiet, even though other customers still moved in and out, ordering drinks and chatting softly. The small group at Naomi's table existed in a world of their own, a world held together by truth, guilt, and the weight of realization. Betsy stared at the final page in the folder, her fingers trembling lightly against the paper. Tears pooled in her eyes again, but this time they didn't blink away. They fell freely, landing on the printed statements she once believed Brad had managed alone. Richard shifted stiffly beside her, but even he wasn't able to mask the crack forming in his usually stoic composure. Naomi waited. She didn't rush the moment, didn't jump in to ease their discomfort. She let the truth settle, not harshly, but honestly. Then Betsy's voice broke. Naomi, how could we have been so wrong? Her tears came harder now, her breathing uneven as she pressed a hand against her chest. We accused you of not supporting Brad. We accused you of not doing enough, but you were doing more than all of us combined. Richard swallowed hard, looking down at the papers with an expression that mixed embarrassment and disbelief. Naomi kept her posture composed. I didn't bring this to hurt you, she said calmly. I brought it because you deserve to know the truth, and I deserve to say it. Betsy shook her head, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. We treated you like an outsider in your own family. We judged your work, your time, your intentions. Not once did we stop to ask if you needed help. Not once did we consider the possibility that you were lifting all of us up. Richard let out a long, shaky breath. I thought Brad was doing everything. I told myself he was taking care of the house, taking care of us. I never imagined. You never imagined it could be me, Naomi finished gently. He nodded slowly. Naomi didn't want to make him feel worse, but she needed him to understand. I didn't help because I wanted recognition. I helped because I loved Brad. Because I believe in family, not just mine, but the one we were all trying to build together. Betsy covered her face again, tears streaming. We repaid all of that kindness by pushing you out. Naomi inhaled slowly. You didn't just push me out. You pushed out the truth. You pushed out the person who was trying to support your son and your grandson. And you pushed out someone who wanted to be part of your lives. Richard dropped his head into his hands, rubbing his temples. We failed you, terribly. Just then, the bell over the cafe door jingled. Brad stepped inside. Naomi turned toward him instinctively. He saw her, then saw his parents, both red-eyed, shaking and visibly broken. His eyebrows knit in confusion. What's going on? Betsy immediately reached out, standing halfway. Brad, we didn't know. We didn't know any of this. Brad looked between his mother, father, and Naomi. He walked over slowly, his movements cautious, as though he didn't yet know what emotional landmine he was stepping into. Naomi spoke softly. I told them. Brad exhaled. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was relief. Relief that the truth was finally spoken out loud after being carried alone for so long. Betsy wiped her cheeks. Brad, she helped us. She helped us with everything. The bills, the mortgage, the car. All this time we thought you were struggling to keep up. You weren't. She was the one keeping everything together. Richard nodded, his voice thick. We misjudged her. We misjudged all of this. Brad took a seat beside Naomi, placing a steadying hand on her back. Mom, Dad, I've been trying to tell you for years that you judged her too quickly. But even I didn't know how much she was covering. I knew she helped sometimes, but I never knew the extent. Naomi looked down briefly. Brad lifted her chin so she would meet his eyes. You shouldn't have had to carry that alone. Betsy broke into another tearful wave. Naomi, I'm so sorry. We treated you with suspicion when you were the one giving the most. We questioned your dedication when you were the one sacrificing the most. Naomi nodded, but didn't speak. Her silence wasn't cold. It was thoughtful, steady. Then came the question that made the entire table hold its breath. Betsy whispered, Do you think you can ever forgive us? Naomi didn't answer immediately. She looked at Brad, then at the folder, then back at Betsy and Richard. Forgiveness was never something she handed out casually, but it was also something she believed deeply in. She folded her hands slowly, her expression softening as she prepared to respond. Naomi's eyes met Betsy's. Her answer, whatever it would be, held the power to either rebuild this family or break it for good. The days following the emotional meeting at the cafe were unusually quiet. Naomi didn't rush forgiveness. She didn't rush conversation either. She allowed herself space, not out of punishment, but out of protection. Healing didn't happen in a single afternoon, and truth didn't unwrite years of misunderstanding in one conversation. Brad respected that rhythm. He understood that rebuilding trust required patience. One warm afternoon, 2 days after the cafe meeting, a soft knock echoed through Naomi's apartment. Naomi had just settled Peter on the living room rug with his colorful blocks. Brad was grading assignments at the small dining table, a half-finished iced coffee beside him. Naomi glanced toward the door, suspicion flickering across her expression. Expecting anyone? Brad shook his head. Not me. She walked to the door, opened it cautiously. And there stood Betsy and Richard. Their posture wasn't proud or stiff this time. They looked humbled, nervous even. Betsy held a small container of homemade cornbread, her fingers gripping it as if it were a peace offering. Richard's hands were clasped in front of him, his gaze lowered before he forced himself to meet Naomi's eyes. "Hi," Betsy said softly. "We didn't want to come uninvited, but we wanted to stop by. If that's okay." Naomi didn't answer immediately. The moment felt heavier than she expected. She stepped aside slowly. "Come in." They entered quietly, almost tiptoeing, as if afraid their presence might disturb the air in the apartment. They were seeing Naomi differently now, not just as Brad's wife, but as someone whose generosity reached further than they had ever acknowledged. Peter spotted the visitors and toddled over with a delighted squeal. "Nana." Betsy let out a small, emotional laugh. "Hi, sweetheart." She lifted him into her arms, kissing his cheek. The gesture wasn't forced. It carried genuine warmth. Richard placed a hand on Peter's back, offering a gentle pat. "Hey, little man." Even in the tension, Peter bridged the space with innocent charm. Naomi returned to the living room, sitting on the couch while Brad moved beside her. Betsy and Richard sat across from them, visibly unsure of how much space they were allowed to occupy. Betsy cleared her throat. "We wanted to say thank you again for meeting us the other day. We know it couldn't have been easy." Naomi nodded. "It wasn't, but it was necessary." Richard leaned forward slightly. "We've been talking, a lot, and we realized we didn't just misunderstand you. We didn't try to understand you at all." Betsy's eyes watered again. "You've been nothing but kind. And we were small-minded. We let old habits and old expectations guide how we treated you. It wasn't fair." Naomi listened in silence. She wasn't defensive, she wasn't cold. She was simply receiving their words with the same dignity she carried through every challenge. Brad looked at his parents, then at Naomi, proud of how she held herself. Richard exhaled sharply. "We don't expect everything to go back to normal immediately, but we want to do better. We want to understand you, respect you, and earn back a place in your life." Betsy nodded quickly. "Only if you'll have us." Naomi took a moment. She crossed one leg over the other, her foot tapping lightly as she considered her words. "I appreciate your honesty," she finally said. "I can see you mean it, but forgiveness isn't instant. It's a process. There are boundaries now, healthy ones, and rebuilding trust takes time." Betsy nodded deeply, tears clinging to her lashes. "We understand, and we're willing to do the work." It was quiet for a beat. Brad stood and motioned for his parents to follow him toward the kitchen. "Let's give Naomi a minute," he murmured. Naomi stayed seated while Peter played with his blocks at her feet. She took a slow breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. Brad returned a few minutes later after speaking quietly with his parents. They said their goodbyes softly and slipped out, leaving the apartment door closing gently behind them. Brad sat beside Naomi and took her hand, rubbing his thumb across her knuckles. "How do you feel?" She leaned back against the couch, letting her head rest on the cushion. Relieved, drained, but lighter than before. "They really are trying," Brad said softly. "I know," she replied, "and that's what makes this possible." Brad shifted closer, his hand moving to rest gently on her leg. "You handled today with so much grace. You always do." She smiled faintly. "I learned a long time ago. Reacting in anger rarely gets you anywhere. But responding with clarity, that opens doors." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, lingering a moment longer than usual. A quiet affirmation of his love, his respect, his admiration. "You're incredible," he whispered. Naomi felt her heart soften. Moments like this reminded her why she fought so hard for their family, for the life they were building together, for the stability Peter deserved. They talked privately for a while, sharing their thoughts about Betsy and Richard. Brad admitted his worries. "I don't want you to feel like you have to fix everything. You don't owe them anything." Naomi leaned into him. "I know, but I believe in wholeness, and sometimes that means letting people try again." Peter waddled toward them, his arms raised, wanting to climb into their laps. They pulled him in, holding him in the warm space between them. His giggle broke the tension completely. Seeing the three of them together, peacefully, naturally, reminded Naomi of what truly mattered. Later that night, after Peter was asleep, Naomi and Brad stood by the window looking out at the quiet Jacksonville street. The night breeze drifted through a small crack in the window. "Do you think we'll let them back in?" Brad asked quietly. Naomi took a moment, thoughtful and steady. "Maybe, if they continue to show sincerity, if they respect boundaries, if they understand who I truly am." Brad nodded. "Whatever you choose, I'm with you." Naomi squeezed his hand. As they stood together, Naomi realized she would soon have to decide whether healing meant bringing Brad's parents back into their world or protecting the peace she had rebuilt. A week passed after Betsy and Richard's visit to Naomi's apartment. It was a quiet week, not silent, not tense, just quiet. Naomi needed space to let the dust settle inside her heart, and Brad respected that. They didn't rush hurried conclusions or force decisions. Instead, they focused on their small routines, breakfast with Peter, late-night talks, and the comfortable silence that follows two people who trust each other deeply. One evening, Naomi stood in the kitchen stirring a pot on the stove. The scent of garlic and herbs filled the apartment, drifting into the living room where Brad was playing with Peter. Every few seconds, Peter giggled wildly as Brad lifted him into the air and pretended to fly him through the room. Naomi watched them from the doorway, her heart swelling in a way she couldn't quite put into words. This little family, messy, imperfect, resilient, was what she valued most. And maybe letting Brad's parents try again wouldn't ruin that. Maybe it could strengthen it. Brad noticed her standing there and smiled. "You okay?" She nodded softly. "Yeah. I've been thinking." He lowered Peter gently and stood upright, giving her his full attention. "About your parents?" "Our parents," she corrected quietly. That alone made Brad's shoulders drop with relief. "They're trying," Naomi continued, walking toward him. "They didn't just apologize once and disappear. They've been checking in, respecting space, and I can see sincerity this time." Brad reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "So what are you thinking?" "I want to invite them to dinner," she said. "Something small, nothing fancy, just a step." Brad's expression softened into admiration. "You're choosing grace again." Naomi shrugged slightly. "Grace isn't weakness, it's choice, and I want our family to move forward, not stay stuck." Brad pulled her gently against him, kissing her forehead with quiet affection. "Whatever you choose, I'm with you." 2 days later, the apartment bustled with warm energy. Naomi had insisted on cooking the meal herself, not to impress, but to create an atmosphere of welcome. Soft jazz played lightly through the speakers. Peter sat in his high chair, banging on a plastic spoon, adding percussion to the music. Brad set the table while Naomi adjusted dishes, tasting sauces and seasoning with her grandmother's old habits. She wasn't trying to show off. She simply wanted the moment to feel grounded and honest. At exactly 6 o'clock, a gentle knock sounded at the door. Naomi took a breath. Brad squeezed her hand. "Here we go." She opened the door. Betsy and Richard stood there, looking more put together than before, but still humbled by everything that had happened. Betsy held a small bouquet of flowers from a local market. Richard carried a bottle of sparkling cider. "Hi, Naomi," Betsy said gently. "Thank you for inviting us." Naomi stepped aside. "Come in." They did, moving slowly, taking in the warm smells and the soft lighting. Peter squealed when he saw them. "Nana," he shouted again, kicking his feet excitedly. Betsy gave a tender smile. "There's my boy." She scooped him up, kissing his cheek. Richard approached Brad and extended his hand. "Thank you for having us, son." Brad shook his hand firmly. "I'm glad you came." Dinner began with small talk, careful but genuine. Naomi served plates, her movements calm and steady, while Betsy kept whispering compliments. "This is delicious, Naomi. You always cook so well. I should have asked you to teach me this recipe years ago." Richard occasionally chimed in, each word carrying a humility Naomi hadn't heard from him before. Halfway through the meal, conversation shifted. Not forced, simply natural. Richard cleared his throat. "Naomi," he began, "I want you to know I've spent a lot of time thinking about what you said at the cafe." Naomi paused, giving him space. "I judged you unfairly," he admitted. "I judged your career, your ambition, without understanding the heart behind it. I was wrong." Betsy nodded, her voice trembling. "We both were. And we allowed old ways of thinking to cloud how we saw you. We're sorry for that." Naomi didn't break eye contact. "Thank you for saying that. I've moved forward, but hearing you acknowledge it matters more than you know." Betsy reached across the table hesitantly. "Naomi, you have been a blessing to Brad. And to us, even when we didn't realize it. We hope, we pray, you can allow us a place in your lives again." Naomi inhaled deeply. Her mind flickered through memories, the porch confrontation, the painful walk to her car, the nights in the apartment where she coded through tears she never let fall in public. And then, The meeting at the cafe. The honesty, the accountability, the humility. She placed her fork down carefully. I believe in second chances, she said. I believe in rebuilding when both sides are willing to grow. So yes, I'm choosing the high road, not because everything is perfect, but because I don't want us to stay broken. Betsy covered her mouth with her hand, tears forming instantly. Oh, Naomi. Naomi continued gently. But I need clarity, respect, and partnership. Not assumptions, not judgment. Richard nodded firmly. You'll have that. From both of us. Brad looked at Naomi with admiration glowing in his expression. Peter, sensing the change in the air, clapped his hands loudly and shouted, Yay! Everyone laughed softly, the kind of laugh that breaks tension, not masks it. After dinner, Naomi brought out a small dessert. Betsy insisted on helping clean, even though Naomi refused to let her wash dishes on her first visit back. As they prepared to leave, Betsy suddenly turned, tears running freely. Naomi, she whispered, voice cracking, you are family, and I am grateful you are my daughter. Naomi froze for half a second, not in shock, but in quiet acceptance. She stepped forward, hugging Betsy gently. Thank you. Richard's eyes softened as he watched them. Brad exhaled quietly, knowing they had reached a turning point. Naomi closed the door after they left, leaned back against it, and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, the beginning of peace. Jacksonville's South Side buzzed with its usual weekend soundtrack, car radios humming old-school R&B, kids laughing. As they ran along sidewalks, the distant thump of a basketball court where teenagers tried to outshine each other. But the loudest energy today belonged to Naomi's family backyard, where folding chairs, long, tables and 3 mismatched grills transformed the yard into a full-blown celebration. Smoke rose from the grills like a welcome sign. Naomi's uncles were arguing loudly about who seasoned their ribs the correct way, while her cousins set out coolers of lemonade, sweet tea, and sodas. Her mother floated from table to table, greeting neighbors with hugs. The sun glowed warmly against the bright colors of the gathering. Naomi walked out of the house carrying a tray of marinated chicken, and her family cheered. There go the hands that saved the community center. One shouted, Y'all better show Naomi some respect. She builds computers and builds families at the same time. Another teased. Naomi rolled her eyes playfully. Y'all are too much. Then the moment everyone had been waiting for appeared at the front gate. Brad's parents. Betsy clutched a large bowl of homemade potato salad. Richard carried a container covered in foil, looking stiff but determined. They hesitated for a moment, unsure if they belonged in such a lively, unfamiliar space. Naomi's mother spotted them first and approached with a warm smile. You must be Betsy and Richard, she said, pulling them both into quick hugs before they could protest. We've been expecting y'all. Betsy let out a relieved breath. Thank you. We're so happy to be here. Naomi's mother waved them in. Come on now. No one stands still around here. Grab a plate and join the fun. Naomi watched the exchange with quiet appreciation. This was exactly why she wanted this moment. Unity, not separation. Brad approached his parents, smiling. You made it. We wouldn't miss this, Betsy said, adjusting her bowl. Peter ran out of the house before anyone could stop him, his little sneakers kicking up dust. Nana, Papa, he squealed. Betsy crouched and scooped him up. There's my boy. Richard's posture softened as Peter hugged his neck too. The tension lingering in him eased slightly. Naomi stepped forward. Glad you're here. Betsy nodded, her eyes already glistening. We're grateful to be included. To break the emotional moment, Naomi's cousin shouted, Naomi, come grill this chicken the way Brad's mama likes it. The entire yard exploded in laughter. Naomi laughed too. Lord, here we go. Betsy waved her hands. Oh no, don't grill for me. I should be the one learning from you. One of Naomi's uncles chimed in. You better teach her, Naomi. This family don't let anyone escape without learning how to grill right. Right? Another uncle yelled. Brad tried to grill once and we almost lost the backyard. Brad threw his hands up. I apologized for that. Even Richard laughed at that, shaking his head. The tension continued melting away. Naomi walked to the grill, lifted the lid, and set the chicken down. Smoke puffed upward, stinging her eyes. Whew, she coughed dramatically. Betsy-style grilling isn't easy. Betsy burst out laughing so hard she snorted, a sound that surprised even her. Oh goodness. She gasped. Maybe I don't grill as well as I thought. Richard stepped closer, offering playful help. If you burn it, I'm blaming Brad. Oh, absolutely, Naomi said. We blame Brad for everything. Brad wrapped an arm around her waist from behind. Hey now. I'm innocent. The moment was soft, romantic, and filled with gratitude. Naomi leaned back slightly into him. Their connection radiated through the crowd with ease. Nothing forced, nothing strained. Later, as everyone ate, Peter ran between both sets of grandparents, handing them toys, grapes, napkins, and things no one needed. He kept shouting, "Look," at random intervals, making everyone smile. Naomi's mother observed quietly, a hand pressed to her heart. She whispered to Naomi, "This is what healing looks like, baby." Naomi nodded. "Yeah, it feels good." When dessert was served, peach cobbler, banana pudding, and a pound cake, that disappeared too quickly. Richard raised his cup of sweet tea. "I just want to say something," he began. The yard quieted. Conversation softened. He looked at Naomi first. "Thank you for welcoming us today. We know we didn't make it easy for you, but you made it easy for us to come back." Naomi nodded graciously. Richard continued, "Family isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to try again, and we're grateful you've allowed us to try." People murmured in support. A few clapped softly. Naomi smiled. "Thank you, Richard. If this moment of unity warmed your heart the way it warmed theirs, go ahead and tap that like button. Drop a comment below. It helps us share more powerful stories that remind us what family, love, and second chances look like." The barbecue continued for another hour. Laughter, dancing, gentle teasing, and warm hospitality blending Brad's world and Naomi's world seamlessly. Naomi looked around and felt something settle inside her, a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. As the sun dipped low, Naomi realized it was time to give Brad's parents the final gift, the surprise she had prepared to close this chapter with grace. The sun had barely risen the next morning when Naomi found herself sitting at the small dining table in her apartment, laptop open, a cup of tea warming her hands. The barbecue had stretched well into the evening, but even after everyone left, the warmth of reconciliation lingered in her mind like a glow that refused to fade. Peter was still asleep, curled against his blanket with his stuffed lion tucked under his arm. Brad was in the kitchen preparing breakfast quietly, eggs, toast, and fruit, humming softly as he moved. It was one of those peaceful mornings where nothing felt rushed. Naomi glanced over at him. "You're cheerful." Brad grinned. "Yesterday felt big, really big." She nodded, closing her laptop slightly. "Yeah, I think everyone needed it." Brad walked over, placing a plate in front of her. "Especially my parents." She smiled. "They're trying. That matters." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "So, what's next for you? With your business, I mean." Naomi hesitated for a moment. She hadn't truly opened up to Brad's parents about her company, at least not beyond surface details. But yesterday's harmony gave her courage. "I'm thinking of expanding," she said softly. "But not just for profit. I want to build something that creates opportunity." Brad's eyebrows lifted. "Like what?" She took a slow breath. "A scholarship fund. For students who feel unseen the way I once did. Kids in overlooked neighborhoods, kids without resources, kids who just need someone to bet on them." Brad's expression softened. "Naomi, that's incredible." She looked down, rubbing her thumb against her mug. "I want to do it right, though, and that means being open about what I've built." Brad reached over and touched her hand. "Your parents yesterday, they were amazed. My parents were humbled. I think they're ready to hear more about you." Naomi paused. "Are they?" "Absolutely," Brad said firmly. "They want to earn your trust now." Almost on cue, there was a gentle knock on the door. Brad and Naomi exchanged a look. "Do you think?" Naomi began. Brad nodded. "Probably them." He stood and opened the door. Betsy and Richard were standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee from the cafe down the street. Betsy gave a nervous wave. "Good morning. Hope it's not too early." Naomi smiled politely. "Not at all. Come in." They stepped inside slowly, glancing at the tidy apartment, the soft morning light, the quiet peacefulness. Betsy placed 1 coffee in front of Naomi. "We, thought you might like this. You drank this flavor yesterday." Naomi's eyes softened. "Thank you." Richard cleared his throat. "We were hoping, if you have time, that you'd tell us more about your work." Naomi blinked, slightly surprised. "You want to hear about it?" "Truly," Betsy said, nodding. We feel like we only saw the surface of who you were. We'd like to understand the rest." Naomi gestured toward the couch. "Okay, let's sit." They settled into place, Betsy sitting with careful posture, Richard leaning forward with hands clasped. Brad sat beside Naomi, offering quiet support through his presence alone. Naomi opened her laptop fully now. "I guess the best place to start is why I built my company in the first place." Both parents nodded, giving her their full attention. "I grew up watching my mother run community projects," Naomi began. "She helped kids apply for college, hosted tutoring sessions, found resources for families. I learned early that your circumstances don't define you, unless people stop giving you chances." Betsy swallowed hard. "That's powerful," Naomi continued. "So when I got into tech, I wanted to build something practical, something that could give people opportunities, even if they didn't have connections." Richard leaned in. "And you built that from scratch?" Naomi nodded. "Every line of code, every design, every investor meeting, every late night." Betsy's eyes shined. "Dear, why didn't you ever tell us?" Naomi took a slow breath, choosing words carefully. "Because I didn't want my work to become a competition or a pressure point. I just wanted peace." Brad squeezed her hand gently. Richard exhaled. "We made you feel small while you were doing something extraordinary." Naomi didn't deny it. "You judged me before you knew me, but you're learning, and I see that." Betsy wiped her cheeks again. "We want to support you now, truly." Naomi gave a small, genuine smile. "Then I'd love your help with something. I want to create a scholarship, maybe 2 at first, and eventually more. I'd like for both of you to be involved in selecting the students." They stared at her, stunned. Richard blinked. You would trust us with that?" "I would," Naomi said softly. "If you're ready." Betsy nodded firmly. "We are, absolutely." Peter wandered into the room then, hair messy, clutching his lion. "Hi," he mumbled sleepily. Betsy opened her arms. "Come here, sweet boy." Peter climbed into her lap without hesitation. Richard reached over to ruffle his hair. Brad looked on with quiet pride, and Naomi couldn't help but feel her chest warm. This moment was the beginning of something stable, something healed. Later that afternoon, Brad and Naomi walked outside together while Peter napped, and Betsy and Richard organized the stack of scholarship notes Naomi had printed. Brad wrapped his arm around her back. "You did that?" Naomi looked up at him. "We did." "No," Brad murmured, leaning close. "You led with grace. You taught all of us something." She rested her head against his shoulder and whispered, "I hope so." "Absolutely," he said. As they stood quietly, Naomi felt her heart settle in a place that finally felt safe. Naomi turned to Brad with a small smile. "I have one more surprise, for your parents." Brad blinked. "Do I get a hint?" She shook her head. "Nope, you'll see it tonight." He grinned. "This should be good." Naomi nodded. "It will be." Evening settled gently over Jacksonville, painting the sky in warmer tones that seemed to match the peace inside Naomi's apartment. The barbecue had cleared old tension, the morning conversation created new respect, and, now, as night approached, Naomi prepared the final step in sealing this new chapter. She was seated at her small table, carefully placing papers into a slim folder. Not graphs, not invoices, not evidence of what she had once carried. These papers carried something much lighter, something hopeful. Brad watched her from the kitchen doorway, arms folded, curious. "You still won't tell me what's in that folder?" "Nope," Naomi said softly, snapping it closed. "But you're about to be proud." Brad walked toward her and kissed the top of her head. "Already proud." Naomi smiled quietly. Moments like this, steady, grounded affection, reminded her why she fought so hard to protect their peace. Peter toddled by with his toy truck, humming to himself, leaving a trail of random crumbs that neither parent had energy to address yet. "Ready?" Naomi asked. Brad nodded. "Ready." Within minutes, Betsy and Richard arrived at the apartment again. They knocked softly, almost timidly, and when Brad opened the door, they stepped. Inside with gentle smiles, still humbled, but far more hopeful than the day before. "Thank you again for having us," Betsy said, hands clasped nervously. Naomi motioned them toward the couch. "Sit. I have something to share with you." Richard straightened. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Naomi assured. "This isn't bad news. It's a fresh start." Brad took a seat next to her. Betsy and Richard leaned in, expectant. Naomi placed the folder on the coffee table, sliding it toward them. "This is for both of you." Betsy blinked. "What is it?" "Open it," Naomi encouraged. Richard lifted the flap and pulled out the first sheet. His brows rose instantly. Betsy leaned closer to read. It was a letter, handwritten in Naomi's elegant cursive. "To Betsy and Richard, family isn't perfect, and none of us always get it right. But I believe in second chances, in rebuilding, and in moving forward with intention and gratitude." Betsy's lips trembled as she kept reading. "I want us to grow together, stronger, wiser, kinder. This small fund is not repayment, not compensation, and not charity. It is simply a seed for healthier habits, smarter decisions, and a future we build as a united family. Let this be our clean slate. With love, Naomi." Folded inside the letter were documents confirming a small financial account Naomi had set up in their names. Nothing extravagant, just enough to help them adjust, save better, and recover from their recent panic. Richard swallowed hard. He removed his glasses, wiping at his eyes. "Naomi, we can't accept this." "You can," Naomi said gently, "because it's not about money, it's about growth." Betsy covered her mouth as a tear slipped down her cheek. "We treated you so poorly, and you still choose kindness?" Naomi nodded softly. "Because holding on to anger doesn't build anything. But choosing intention does." Richard stared at her, awe replacing the shame he once clung to. "You're remarkable." Truly, Naomi didn't bask in the praise. She simply gave a small, humble smile. "We're all learning." Brad placed his hand over hers. He was watching her with a look she'd seen many times, admiration mixed with love. Mixed with gratitude he struggled to put into words. Peter wandered in then, clutching his lion again, climbing into Naomi's lap as if sensing the emotional weight of the room. His innocence softened the moment even more. Betsy reached toward him, brushing his curls gently. "You have a remarkable mother, sweetheart." Peter grinned. "I know." Everyone laughed softly, easing the intensity. Richard cleared his throat. "You've given us more than we deserve, and we promise not to waste this chance." Naomi nodded. "That's all I want, a real chance for us to be a healthy family." Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was warm, full, healing. Then Betsy leaned forward, voice trembling. "Naomi, may I say something?" "Of course." Betsy placed a hand over her heart. "You are my daughter, not by blood, but by choice, and I am grateful for you." Naomi's breath caught. Brad's hand tightened around hers. Even Richard nodded, eyes glossy with emotion. The weight of everything they had survived together, the misunderstanding, the hurt, the separation, settled into something new now. Something sturdy, something real. Brad shifted closer and pressed a soft kiss to Naomi's forehead. A quiet, tender gesture that spoke of pride, love, and relief all at once. The narrator's voice slipped into place, giving the final life lesson. Never underestimate the quiet one in the room. Never confuse humility for weakness. Never assume someone's worth based on what you think you know. And above all, never forget that forgiveness can rebuild bridges that pride once burned. Outside the window, Peter began tapping his toy truck against the glass. "Mommy, look, the sky's purple." They all turned, and sure enough, the evening sky had deepened into soft purples and golds, a peaceful reminder of new beginnings. Betsy lifted Peter into her lap. Richard helped him roll the toy truck along the coffee table, making soft sound effects. Brad wrapped his arm around Naomi again, and Naomi watched quietly, heart full. A family restored, a new legacy beginning. A woman who held everything together, finally seen, honored, and respected. And in the middle of the room, Peter giggled, the beautiful sound of a child who would grow up surrounded by a unified family. A family that learned, a family that healed, a family that grew. The end.